36 Mother Bear worked 48 hours straight during hospital emergency. What this baby witnessed put everyone in tears. The clock on the hospital wall showed 2:47 a.m. when Dr. Avery Johnson felt her legs begin to shake. She had been standing for nearly 36 hours straight, her surgical scrubs stained with the evidence of countless procedures, her eyes burning from the harsh fluorescent lights that never dimmed in this place of constant motion. The emergency department had transformed into something unrecognizable over the past day and a half. What started as a routine Thursday evening shift had exploded into chaos when the call came through about the multi-car pileup on Highway 89. 7 vehicles, 15 victims, and a pediatric trauma unit pushed beyond its limits. She pressed her palm against the cold tile wall for support, allowing herself just a moment to breathe before the next crisis demanded her attention. Miles away, in their modest 2-story home on Maple Street, Ethan Marshall walked the same path he had been tracing for hours. From the kitchen to the living room, up the stairs to check on their 8-month-old daughter Lily, then back down again. The floorboards creaked in familiar places, a symphony of worry that played on repeat. He had received Avery's text message yesterday morning, brief and clinical, in the way she communicated when the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. Major incident, won't be home, multiple surgeries scheduled. Love you both, that was it. No details about when she might return, no reassurance about her own well-being. Just the facts, delivered with the efficiency of someone who had already given everything to saving lives and had nothing left for elaborate explanations. The house felt different without Avery's presence. It wasn't just the absence of her voice or the way she hummed while making coffee. It was something deeper, as if the very walls missed her energy. Ethan found himself checking his phone every few minutes, hoping for an update, a message, anything that would tell him she was okay. He knew the statistics about medical errors caused by exhaustion, had heard Avery talk about colleagues who had collapsed during marathon shifts. But he also knew his wife, knew the fierce determination that burned in her when children's lives hung in the balance. She would push herself beyond any reasonable limit if it meant saving even one more child. Lily had been unusually quiet all day. Normally, when Avery was gone for extended periods, their daughter would become fussy, crying in that particular way that seemed to say she knew something important was missing from her world. But today was different. Today, Lily lay in her crib with an expression of serene concentration, her bright eyes fixed on the far corner of the nursery where the rocking chair sat empty. At first, Ethan thought she was simply tired, perhaps coming down with something. He checked her temperature 3 times, examined her for any signs of illness, but found nothing. She was perfectly healthy, perfectly content, just watching. The nursery had been Avery's project during her pregnancy. She had painted the walls herself, a soft sage green that she said would be calming for the baby. The rocking chair in the corner was an antique they had found at an estate sale, its worn wooden arms polished smooth by generations of mothers rocking their children to sleep. Above it hung a mobile of paper cranes that Avery had folded during her bed rest in the final weeks before Lily's birth. Each crane was made from a different patterned paper, some with tiny flowers, others with geometric designs, all of them catching the light from the window in different ways throughout the day. As evening approached and stretched into night, Ethan noticed something peculiar about Lily's behavior. She wasn't just staring at the corner, she was tracking something with her eyes. Slow, deliberate movements from left to right, up and down, as if following the path of something only she could see. He sat on the floor beside her crib, following her gaze, trying to understand what held her attention so completely. The corner remained stubbornly empty. just the chair and the wall, and the shifting shadows cast by the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. He thought about calling his mother, asking her to come over and help, but something stopped him. There was a quality to the silence in the house that felt important, sacred even. Breaking it with phone calls and explanations seemed wrong somehow. Instead, he made himself a cup of coffee, his fourth since morning, and settled into the routine of watching his daughter watch nothing at all. Or perhaps not nothing. Perhaps something his adult eyes had forgotten how to see. The hospital cafeteria had run out of decent coffee 12 hours ago, leaving only the bitter dregs that tasted like disappointment and desperation. Avery didn't care. She drank it anyway, needing the caffeine to keep her hands steady for what was coming next. The trauma board showed 3 more surgeries scheduled, all pediatric cases from the accident. A 6-year-old with internal bleeding that they had managed to stabilize, but who would need careful repair work. A 4-year-old with multiple fractures that required delicate pinning. And then there was Jacob Bennett, age 7, whose case file made even the senior surgeons pause. Jacob's injuries were extensive. The impact had caused damage to multiple organs, and the surgery would require a precision that pushed the boundaries of what was possible even under ideal circumstances. These were far from ideal circumstances. Avery had already performed 5 surgeries since the victims started arriving. Her hands ached, her back screamed in protest every time she bent over the operating table, and there was a persistent ringing in her ears that she knew was her body's way of warning her about the dangerous edge she was approaching. But Jacob's chart told a story that went beyond medical terminology and injury assessments. The paramedics had found him conscious at the scene, calling for his mother despite injuries that should have rendered him unconscious from pain. He had been clutching a small toy dinosaur, refusing to let go even as they loaded him into the ambulance. The toy now sat in a plastic bag with his other belongings, waiting for someone to claim it. Avery had seen the admission notes. Mother was in the other vehicle. Status, critical. Location, operating room 3. She didn't know yet that Jessica Brooks had already lost her fight. The information moved slowly through the hospital's communication channels, especially during a crisis of this magnitude. Different departments focused on their own battles, their own attempts to hold back death. The full picture would only emerge later, when the dust settled and the accounting began. For now, Avery knew only that she had a 7-year-old boy who needed her skills, her steadiness, her refusal to give up, even when her body begged for rest. Back at home, Ethan had finally given in to his exhaustion and dozed off in the chair beside Lily's crib. He woke with a start when he heard her making sounds. Not crying exactly, but something softer, almost conversational. She was cooing and babbling, the kind of sound she usually made when Avery played with her, when they had their special mother-daughter conversations that seemed to exist in a language all their own. But Avery wasn't here. The room was dark, except for the gentle glow of the nightlight, and Lily was still focused on that same corner, her tiny hands now moving as if reaching for something. Ethan rubbed his eyes, wondering if he was still dreaming. The rational part of his mind, the part that worked as an engineer and believed in measurable, quantifiable reality, told him that babies often played by themselves, that this was probably normal developmental behavior. But another part, a deeper, older part that remembered being afraid of the dark as a child, that still sometimes felt his grandmother's presence in moments of quiet reflection, whispered that something else was happening here. He stood up slowly, not wanting to disturb whatever was occurring, and moved closer to the corner Lily was watching. The air felt different there, not warmer or cooler, but somehow more dense, as if it held more than just empty space. He extended his hand tentatively, feeling foolish but unable to stop himself, and for just a moment, just the briefest instant he could have sworn he felt something. Not a touch exactly, but an intention. A presence that acknowledged him before returning its attention to Lily. The baby laughed then, a delighted giggle that made Ethan's heart skip. It was the laugh she reserved for peekaboo games and butterfly kisses, for moments of pure joy and connection. But there was no one there to play with her, no one visible anyway. Ethan found himself accepting what his rational mind couldn't explain. His daughter was interacting with something, someone, and whatever it was brought her joy rather than fear. That was enough for him to trust it, to trust her ancient baby wisdom that hadn't yet learned to doubt the impossible. In operating room 7, Avery stood at the scrub sink, watching the water run over her hands as she prepared for Jacob's surgery. The surgical team was assembling, nurses and technicians who had been working just as long as she had, all of them running on adrenaline and determination. She could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the way they moved just a fraction slower than usual, the slight tremor in hands that had been steady 12 hours ago. They were all pushing past their limits, united in the unspoken agreement that they would not stop, could not stop, while children's lives hung in the balance. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Michael Hayes, had been her colleague for 5 years. She had seen him work through difficult cases, had trusted him with the most fragile patients. But tonight she saw something in his expression that worried her. Not incompetence or carelessness, but a bone-deep weariness that matched her own. They were all walking a tightrope, balancing between their duty to save lives and the very real danger that exhaustion posed to their ability to do so safely. "You sure about this, Avery?" Michael asked quietly as they prepared to enter the OR. "We could have Davidson take this one." He just came on shift, but they both knew Davidson, while competent, didn't have Avery's experience with complex pediatric trauma. Jacob needed her specifically, her particular combination of skill and instinct that had saved children others had written off. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and pushed through the doors into the sterile, bright world where she would fight for Jacob's life. The thing about surgery, especially pediatric surgery, was that it required a kind of dissociation. You had to separate the child on the table from the human being they were, had to see them as a collection of systems and structures that needed repair. It was the only way to maintain the steady hands and clear thinking necessary for the precise work. But Avery had never been good at that complete separation. She always kept a small part of herself aware of the whole child, the one who had a favorite color and a best friend, and parents who were sitting in a waiting room praying for a miracle. As she looked down at Jacob, small and vulnerable under the surgical lights, she saw not just the extensive trauma that needed her attention, but the boy who had clutched his dinosaur toy, who had called for his mother through unimaginable pain. She placed her hand gently on his head for just a moment before the surgical draping covered him, a silent promise that she would do everything in her power to return him to the world of dinosaur toys and mother's hugs. The surgery began with the usual choreography of instruments and instructions, each team member playing their part in the complex dance. But as Avery made the first incision, something shifted in the room. The air seemed to thicken, not unpleasantly, but noticeably. She felt a presence beside her, not physical but undeniable, like the feeling of someone reading over your shoulder. Her hands, which had begun to shake slightly from exhaustion, suddenly steadied. The fog of fatigue that had been creeping into her thoughts cleared, replaced by a crystalline focus she hadn't felt since the beginning of her shift. Michael noticed it too. "Your vitals just stabilized," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. Heart rate down, breathing regular. "You okay?" She was more than okay. She felt supported, held up by something beyond her own depleted reserves. It was as if someone else's strength was flowing into her, someone else's determination adding to her own. She nodded to Michael and continued the surgery, her movements precise and confident despite the complexity of Jacob's injuries. At home, Lily had finally begun to show signs of tiredness. Her eyelids drooped even as she continued to watch the corner of the room, fighting sleep with the determination of a baby who didn't want to miss something important. Ethan picked her up gently, cradling her against his chest, and was surprised when she didn't protest. Usually, moving her when she was focused on something resulted in immediate complaints. But now, she simply shifted her gaze, looking over his shoulder at the same spot from her new vantage point. He began to walk with her, the slow, swaying motion that had always soothed her since her first days home from the hospital. As he moved through the darkened house, he found himself talking to her, and, perhaps, to whatever she was seeing. "Avery's at the hospital," he said softly. "She's helping kids who got hurt. She's so tired, but she won't stop. That's who your mama is, Lily. She doesn't stop when people need her." The words felt important somehow, like a prayer or an incantation. He continued talking, telling stories about Avery, about how they met, about the day Lily was born. The baby's breathing deepened, but her eyes remained open, still tracking something invisible. And then, just as Ethan was about to place her back in the crib, she reached out her tiny hand and made a grabbing motion at the air, the way she did when Avery pretended to hand her invisible gifts. She pulled her fist to her chest, holding tight to whatever she had received, and finally closed her eyes. The moment Lily fell asleep, Avery felt the shift. The supporting presence that had been with her throughout the surgery began to fade, not abandoning her but stepping back, its work complete. She looked at the clock and realized that what should have been a 4-hour surgery had taken only 2.5. Jacob's repairs were complete, textbook perfect despite the challenging conditions. His vitals were strong, stronger than they had any right to be given what his body had endured. That was, Michael began, then stopped, shaking his head. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and that was something else. You were something else." But Avery knew it wasn't just her. She had been the instrument, but something else had been guiding the music. She stripped off her surgical gown and gloves, her hands trembling now that the mysterious support had withdrawn. The exhaustion came crushing back, but with it came a sense of completion, of having been part of something larger than herself. As she left the OR, one of the nurses caught her arm. "Dr. Johnson, I thought you should know. The boy's mother, Jessica Brooks. She didn't make it. Died about an hour ago in OR 3 inches." The words hit Avery like a physical blow. She had saved Jacob, but he would wake up to a world without his mother. The cruel arithmetic of trauma surgery. Lives saved and lives lost. Families preserved and families shattered. She leaned against the wall, allowing herself a moment of grief for a woman she had never met, a mother who would never again hold her son. But even in that grief, Avery felt something strange, a sense of peace that seemed at odds with the tragic news. It was as if the hospital itself was trying to tell her something, trying to convey a message in a language she didn't quite understand. She thought of Lily, safe at home with Ethan, and felt a sudden, overwhelming need to hold her daughter, to feel the solid reality of her small body, the warmth of her breath, the strong beat of her heart. The drive home was a blur. Avery probably shouldn't have been driving after so many hours awake, but the pull toward home was irresistible. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, the city sleeping peacefully, unaware of the dramas that had played out in the hospital. She found herself thinking about Jessica Brooks, wondering what kind of mother she had been, what bedtime stories she had told Jacob, what songs she had sung to soothe his fears. The weight of that loss sat heavy in her chest, mixing with her exhaustion into an emotion she couldn't quite name. When she finally pulled into their driveway, the house was dark, except for the soft glow from Lily's nursery window. She sat in the car for a moment, gathering the energy to move, to transition from doctor, Johnson to Avery, from surgeon to mother and wife. The front door opened before she could get out, and there was Ethan, looking haggard but relieved, already moving toward her with open arms. "You're home," he said simply, pulling her against him. She could feel the tension in his body, the worry he had been carrying for the past 2 days. "I was so scared," he admitted into her hair. "Not just for you, but something's been happening here. With Lily. I can't explain it." Avery pulled back to look at him, seeing something in his expression she had never seen before. Not fear exactly, but a kind of awe, as if he had witnessed something that had fundamentally shifted his understanding of the world. They went inside together, Ethan's arm around her waist, supporting her exhausted body. He led her up to the nursery, where Lily slept peacefully in her crib. "She's been watching that corner all day," he whispered, pointing to the empty space by the rocking chair. "Not just looking, but really watching. Like someone was there. And Avery, I think someone was. I think someone still is." Avery looked at the corner, seeing nothing but shadows and familiar furniture. But she thought about the presence in the operating room, the steady support that had carried her through Jacob's surgery. She thought about Jessica Brooks, a mother whose love for her son might be stronger than death itself. And looking at her sleeping daughter, she felt the pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture she couldn't quite see but could somehow feel. "Tell me everything," she said to Ethan, sinking into the rocking chair that had been the focus of Lily's attention. As he began to describe the day's strange events, Avery found herself looking at the empty space beside her, half expecting to see something, someone, looking back. The room felt full despite containing only the 3 of them, full of love and loss, and something ineffable that connected them all. Ethan's account was detailed and measured, the engineer in him trying to find logical explanations even as he admitted there weren't any. He told her about Lily's focused watching, her cooing and reaching, the moment he thought he felt something in the corner. He told her about the peace on their daughter's face, the complete absence of fear or distress. "It was like she was visiting with someone she loved," he said finally. "Someone who loved her back." Avery shared her own experience then, the presence in the OR, the steady hands when hers should have been shaking, the impossible efficiency of the surgery. She told him about Jacob, about the dinosaur toy, about a mother who hadn't survived to see her son's recovery. As she spoke, she watched Ethan's face change, understanding dawning in his eyes. They sat in silence for a moment, both looking at the corner of the room, both feeling the weight and wonder of what they were considering. "Do you think—" Ethan began, then stopped, unable to voice the thought that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Avery reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers, feeling the solid reality of his touch while acknowledging the mystery that surrounded them. "I think," she said slowly, "that love doesn't always follow the rules we think it should. I think a mother's love might be stronger than we can understand." They stayed in the nursery as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. Avery dozed in the rocking chair while Ethan sat on the floor beside her, both of them keeping watch over their sleeping daughter. The corner of the room remained empty to their eyes, but somehow it didn't feel vacant. It felt like a space holding its breath, waiting for something, or perhaps someone, to need it again. When Lily woke with the sunrise, her first action was to look at the corner. But this time, instead of the focused attention of the previous day, she gave it only a brief glance before turning her bright eyes to her parents. She reached for Avery with obvious delight, and Avery gathered her up. Feeling the solid weight of her, the miraculous reality of this small person they had created. Lily babbled happily, patting Avery's face with her tiny hands, as if confirming that her mother was really there. "I need to check on Jacob," Avery said suddenly, "the boy from the surgery. I need to know he's okay." Ethan understood without explanation. This was all connected somehow. Lily's vigil, Avery's surgery, the presence they had both felt. They needed to see it through to its conclusion, whatever that might be. "We'll come with you," he said. "All of us together." The drive back to the hospital felt different in the morning light. The crisis atmosphere had dissipated, replaced by the normal rhythm of a medical facility dealing with the aftermath of trauma. Avery led her family through the familiar corridors, noting how different everything looked when she wasn't running on pure adrenaline. Nurses she had worked beside for hours greeted her with surprise, wondering why she was back so soon. They found Jacob in the pediatric intensive care unit, still sedated but stable. His small body was connected to various monitors and machines, but his color was good, his breathing steady. The dinosaur toy had been placed on the table beside his bed, waiting for him to wake up and reclaim it. Avery checked his chart, noting with satisfaction that all his post-operative signs were excellent. He would recover, would grow up, would have the chance to become whoever he was meant to be. A woman sat beside his bed, holding his hand. For a moment, Avery's heart stopped, thinking impossibly that it might be Jessica. But no, this was older, with the same color hair but lined face that spoke of years Jessica would never have. "You're Dr. Johnson," the woman said, rising from her chair. "I'm Sarah Brooks, Jessica's mother. Jacob's grandmother. They told me you saved him." The women embraced, strangers bound by tragedy and hope. Sarah's tears wet Avery's shoulder as she whispered her gratitude, her grief, her determination to raise her grandson with all the love his mother would have given. "Jessica was my only child," she said, pulling back to look at Avery with eyes that held unbearable pain. "But she left me this gift, this piece of her that lives on. Thank you for making sure I didn't lose them both." As they talked, Lily began to fuss in Ethan's arms, reaching toward Jacob's bed with increasing insistence. Sarah noticed and smiled through her tears. "She wants to say hello," she said. "Jessica always said babies know things we forget." "May I?" She held out her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan transferred Lily to her embrace. Sarah brought Lily close to Jacob's bed, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment. The baby immediately calmed, looking intently at the sleeping boy. Then, in a movement that made all three adults catch their breath, she reached out and placed her tiny hand on Jacob's arm, right where his grandmother had been holding him. The touch was gentle, deliberate, and somehow seemed to carry meaning beyond a baby's random gesture. Jacob's eyes fluttered. The monitors showed a slight change in his brain activity, movement toward consciousness. He wasn't ready to wake fully, wouldn't be for hours yet, but something in Lily's touch had reached him. His fingers twitched, curling slightly as if grasping for something. Sarah placed the dinosaur toy in his hand, and his fingers closed around it automatically, holding tight even in sleep. "Jessica collected dinosaurs for him," Sarah said softly, still holding Lily. "Started before he was even born. She said every boy needed something to be passionate about, something that made him dream of bigger things. She wanted him to know that even the mightiest creatures could be gentle, that strength didn't always mean fierce. Her voice broke on the last word, and she pulled Lily closer, drawing comfort from the baby's warm weight. Lily allowed the embrace for a moment, then turned in Sarah's arms to look at something past her shoulder. All the adults followed her gaze to an empty spot near the window where morning light was streaming in. Lily smiled, the kind of radiant, delighted smile that babies reserve for faces they love. She waved her small hand, a clear goodbye gesture she had recently learned. Then she turned back to Jacob, patted his arm once more, and reached for her mother. Avery took her daughter, feeling a shift in the room's atmosphere. Whatever had been present was departing, its vigil complete. She thought she understood now. Jessica's spirit, if that's what it had been, had stayed long enough to see her son through surgery, to know he would survive. She had found a way to guide the hands that saved him, to comfort a baby who could still see what adults had learned to ignore. And now, knowing Jacob was safe with his grandmother, knowing he would be loved and protected, she could let go. "We should let him rest," Avery said gently, but Sarah shook her head. "Please, stay just a moment more. I want to tell you something about Jessica. I want someone to know who she was, not just how she died." And so they stayed, listening as Sarah painted a picture of a woman who had been a teacher, who had spent her evenings creating elaborate dinosaur adventures for Jacob, who had sung him to sleep with songs she made up on the spot. She was supposed to work that night, Sarah said. At the school, they were having a science fair. But Jacob had been having nightmares, waking up scared. So she called in sick, stayed home to be with him. They were just going out for ice cream, a special treat to cheer him up. 5 minutes later or earlier, and they would have missed that pile-up entirely. The cruel randomness of it sat heavy between them, the terrible truth that tragedy often hinges on the smallest decisions. But Ethan, still thinking like an engineer even in the midst of mystery, saw it differently. "Maybe she was exactly where she needed to be," he said quietly. "Maybe, if they hadn't been there, someone else would have died. Maybe Jacob's survival, the fact that he'll grow up and do whatever he's meant to do, maybe that was always the plan. We can't know all the threads, can't see the whole pattern." Sarah looked at him with gratitude for the comfort, even if she couldn't quite believe it yet. Grief was too fresh, too sharp. But she filed the words away, something to think about in the long nights ahead, when Jacob's nightmares would become her own, when she would have to find ways to explain why Mommy couldn't come home. As they prepared to leave, Avery felt compelled to make a promise. "We'll check on him," she said to Sarah. "As he recovers, as he grows. If you need anything, medical or otherwise, please call us." She scribbled her personal number on a piece of paper, knowing she was crossing professional boundaries but not caring. This had gone beyond professional the moment Lily had watched an empty corner, and Avery had felt invisible hands guiding her own. The walk back through the hospital felt like a journey between worlds. The ICU with its monitors and medications was solid, real, grounded in science and measurable outcomes. But what they had experienced, what they were still processing, belonged to a different realm entirely. Avery found herself thinking about all the times she had dismissed families who claimed to feel their loved one's presence after death. All the times she had attributed such experiences to grief and wishful thinking. "I don't know how to understand this," she admitted to Ethan as they reached their car. "I'm trained to believe in what I can see, measure, prove. But this..." She gestured helplessly, unable to articulate the paradigm shift happening in her mind. Ethan pulled her close, Lily between them. "Maybe understanding isn't the point," he said. "Maybe just accepting it, being grateful for it, is enough." They drove home in contemplative silence, each processing the events in their own way. Lily fell asleep in her car seat, peaceful and content. When they arrived home, the house felt different. Not empty, but settled. Whatever had been visiting was gone, leaving only the normal quietness of a family home on a Sunday morning. The corner of Lily's nursery was just a corner again, holding nothing but air and dust motes dancing in the sunlight. But the rocking chair seemed to hold a memory, an imprint of presence that made Avery pause every time she passed it. She found herself sitting there more often, rocking Lily to sleep while thinking about Jessica Brooks, about the mysterious connections between souls, about the possibility that love might indeed be stronger than death. Sometimes she talked aloud, sharing the small moments of Lily's development, as if Jessica might still be listening, might want to know that children were growing and thriving in the world she had left. A week later, Jacob woke up fully for the first time. Sarah called Avery immediately, her voice thick with tears of relief and joy. "He's asking for his dinosaurs," she said. "And he's asking for his mom. I don't know what to tell him. How do you explain death to a 7-year-old who just survived the impossible?" Avery didn't have easy answers, but she offered to help, to be there when Sarah found the words. They visited that afternoon, bringing Lily along. Jacob was sitting up in bed, still weak but alert, the dinosaur toy clutched in his hand. When he saw the baby, his eyes widened. "I know her," he said with the certainty children possess about impossible things. "She was in my dream. There was a lady with her, a nice lady who said I would be okay." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, and Avery felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "What did the lady look like?" Sarah asked carefully. Jacob scrunched up his face, thinking. "Like Mommy," he said simply, "but made of light. She said she had to go away, but that I would be safe. She said Grandma would take care of me, and she said the baby would remember." He looked at Lily with solemn eyes. "You remember, don't you?" Lily, in response, laughed and reached for Jacob's dinosaur. He let her touch it, even allowed her to hold it for a moment before gently taking it back. "This is Rex," he informed her seriously. "Mommy gave him to me. He's brave, like me." The adults exchanged glances over the children's heads, witnessing something profound in this simple interaction. As the weeks passed, Jacob began his recovery in earnest. Physical therapy, counseling, the slow process of learning to live with loss while embracing life. Sarah proved to be a fierce advocate for her grandson, channeling her grief into ensuring he had everything he needed. She and Avery developed an unexpected friendship, bonded by the strange circumstances of their meeting and the shared experience of that mysterious night. Ethan returned to work, but found himself changed by what they had witnessed. He became more patient, more open to possibilities beyond the measurable world of engineering. He started reading about consciousness, about near-death experiences, about the many things science couldn't yet explain, not seeking proof or disproof, but simply acknowledging the vastness of what remained unknown. Lily continued to grow and develop normally, showing no further signs of seeing things others couldn't. But sometimes, particularly when they visited Jacob, she would pause and look at empty spaces with a knowing expression, as if greeting old friends. These moments became less frequent as she grew older, as the veil between worlds thickened with age and experience. But they never disappeared entirely. 3 months after the accident, they attended a memorial service for Jessica Brooks. The small church was packed with her students, their parents, colleagues who remembered her passion for teaching. Jacob sat in the front row with Sarah, wearing a suit that was slightly too big, his dinosaur hidden in his pocket for courage. When it came time for remembrances, person after person stood to share how Jessica had touched their lives. A shy girl talked about how Miss Brooks had helped her overcome her fear of speaking in class. A colleague recalled Jessica's patience with difficult students, her belief that every child could learn if given the right support. A parent thanked her for staying after school countless times to tutor their son in math, refusing any payment, insisting it was just part of her job. But it was Jacob who provided the most powerful moment. With Sarah's help, he walked to the front of the church, pulled out a piece of paper, and read in his clear, child's voice, "My mommy was the best mommy in the whole world. She read me stories and made up songs and never got mad when I had bad dreams. She said love is the strongest thing there is, stronger than anything scary. She said love never really goes away, it just changes shape. I miss her every day, but I know she still loves me. And I love her too, forever and ever." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Avery held Lily tight, thinking about the privilege and responsibility of motherhood, about the bonds that transcend physical presence. She caught Sarah's eye and saw her own thoughts reflected there, that Jessica's love had indeed changed shape but had not diminished, had perhaps even grown stronger in its transformation. After the service, as people gathered to share food and memories, Jacob approached Avery with something in his hand. It was a drawing, clearly his own work, showing two figures, one small and solid, one tall and made of scribbly light-colored lines. Between them was a baby, and above them all was a dinosaur with wings. "This is for Lily," he said solemnly, "so she remembers too." Avery accepted the drawing with the gravity it deserved, promising to hang it in Lily's room. And she did, placing it on the wall where Lily would see it every morning when she woke. As the years passed, the drawing would fade and curl at the edges, but its significance would remain, a tangible reminder of the night when the boundaries between worlds grew thin and love proved itself stronger than death. The first anniversary of the accident came with unexpected emotions. Avery found herself restless, unable to focus at work. She kept thinking about that marathon shift, about the presence that had sustained her through Jacob's surgery. The hospital held a small ceremony for the medical staff who had worked that night, acknowledging their extraordinary efforts. But Avery felt like a fraud, accepting praise, knowing that her success had come from something beyond her own skill. That evening, she sat in Lily's nursery. Lily was walking now, talking in two-word sentences, becoming her own small person, and tried to make sense of it all. Ethan found her there, staring at the corner that had been the focus of so much attention a year ago. "Do you think it really happened?" she asked him. "Or did we just imagine it all, create meaning where there was none, because we needed to believe in something?" Ethan considered the question seriously. He had asked himself the same thing many times over the past year. "Does it matter?" he finally replied. "Whether it was real in the way we usually define real, or real in some other way we don't understand. Jacob survived. You were able to save him when you shouldn't have been able to function. Lily showed us that there's more to this world than what we can measure. Isn't that enough?" It was enough, Avery decided. More than enough. It was a gift, a glimpse into the mysterious connections that bind all living things. She had returned to her work with renewed purpose, but also with more humility. She knew now that her skills, while important, were only part of the equation. There were forces at work in healing that went beyond medical knowledge, connections between souls that could bridge the gap between life and death. Jacob started second grade that fall, thriving despite everything he had endured. Sarah sent regular updates, photos of him at school plays, science fairs, soccer games. In every picture, somewhere in the background or tucked in a pocket, was evidence of his dinosaur collection. He had become something of an expert, able to recite facts about different species, their habitats, their extinction. But more than that, he had become a child who understood loss and resilience, who knew that love persisted even when the people we love couldn't stay. One day, Sarah called with news that made Avery's heart swell. Jacob had announced he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. "He says he wants to help kids the way you helped him," Sarah explained, her voice warm with pride. "He remembers you, remembers your kindness. He even remembers Lily, calls her his special friend. He says she brought him back, though I'm not sure what he means by that." Avery knew what he meant. She had seen it herself. That moment when Lily's touch had called Jacob back toward consciousness. Children remembered things adults explained away, held on to truths that didn't fit into rational frameworks. She was glad Jacob retained that memory, that connection to the mysterious events surrounding his survival. As Lily grew older, Avery and Ethan debated whether to tell her about that night. How did you explain to a child that she had once seen something others couldn't, had been a bridge between worlds? They decided to wait, to let her own memories and understanding guide them. But they kept the drawing Jacob had made, and occasionally Lily would look at it with a puzzled expression, as if trying to remember something just out of reach. The story became family legend, told in different ways at different times. Sometimes it was about Avery's heroic surgery, sometimes about Ethan's long vigil with a mysteriously calm baby. Sometimes it was about love transcending death, sometimes about the interconnectedness of all things. Each telling revealed different facets of truth, different ways of understanding what had happened. 5 years after the accident, they received an invitation to Jacob's 12th birthday party. The theme, predictably, was dinosaurs. But this wasn't a little boy's party anymore. Jacob had evolved his interest into a genuine scientific passion, reading paleontology texts far beyond his grade level, volunteering at the Natural History Museum. The party was held there, in the dinosaur hall, surrounded by the massive skeletons of creatures that had once ruled the earth. Lily, now 5.5, was enchanted. She held Jacob's hand as he toured her through the exhibits, explaining each dinosaur with infectious enthusiasm. Watching them together, Avery was struck by the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. Without the tragedy, they would never have met. Jacob might have grown up with his mother, but without this particular passion that had been born from loss and nurtured by a grandmother's determination to honor her daughter's memory. During the party, Sarah pulled Avery aside. "I need to tell you something," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Last week, Jacob was having a bad day, missing Jessica more than usual. He went to his room and I heard him talking. When I asked who he was talking to, he said, 'Mom.' Not in a pretend way, but matter-of-factly, like it was normal. He said she doesn't come often anymore, but sometimes when he really needs her, he can feel her there." Avery felt the familiar chill of recognition. "Do you believe him?" she asked. Sarah smiled, a smile that held grief and joy in equal measure. "I believe love doesn't follow the rules we think it should. I believe Jessica found a way to make sure her son was saved, and maybe she still finds ways to let him know he's loved. Whether that's real or just a comfort we create for ourselves, does it matter?" It was the same question Ethan had asked years ago, and the answer remained the same. It didn't matter, not in the way people thought it should. What mattered was that Jacob was alive, thriving, carrying forward his mother's love in new forms. What mattered was that Lily had been part of something larger than herself before she was old enough to doubt it. What mattered was that Avery had been sustained through an impossible surgery by something beyond her own strength. As the party wound down, Jacob approached Lily with a gift. It was a small dinosaur figurine, carefully chosen from his collection. "This is for you," he said seriously. "It's a Brachiosaurus. They were gentle giants, plant eaters. They protected their babies and lived in families. I thought you should have one, since you're part of my story." Lily accepted the gift with the gravity of a child who understood she was receiving something precious. She hugged Jacob tight, and in that moment, Avery saw a flash of the baby she had been, reaching out to comfort a wounded boy. The connection between them had endured, transformed but unbroken. On the drive home, Lily was quiet, turning the dinosaur over in her hands. Finally, she spoke. "Mom, Jacob said I helped save him when I was a baby." "Is that true?" Avery met Ethan's eyes in the rearview mirror, seeing her own uncertainty reflected there. But Lily deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as they understood. "Yes," Avery said simply. "You did help save him." There was a presence, something we couldn't see but could feel. You could see it somehow, and that presence, that love, helped me save Jacob and helped him find his way back to consciousness. She waited for Lily to dismiss it as impossible, to apply the logic she was learning in kindergarten, but Lily just nodded, as if this confirmed something she had always suspected. "I think it was his mom," she said matter-of-factly. "I think she needed to make sure he was okay before she could go to heaven. And I think she knew I could see her because I was little and hadn't learned yet that some things are supposed to be invisible." Out of the mouths of babes, Avery thought. Lily had articulated what all the adults had struggled to express, that there was a kind of sight that education and experience taught us to suppress, a wisdom we traded for knowledge. She reached back and squeezed Lily's hand, feeling profound gratitude for this child who had been a bridge between worlds before she could even speak. That night, as they tucked Lily into bed with her new dinosaur standing guard on the nightstand, she asked one more question. "Do you think she's still around sometimes? Jacob's mom?" Avery considered lying, providing the kind of reassurance parents often gave about difficult topics. But this family had been built on accepting mystery, on acknowledging the impossible. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think love like that doesn't just disappear. It changes, maybe becomes part of the air or the light or the feeling you get when you're scared and suddenly feel safe. I think Jacob's mom's love is still with him, just in a different form than before." Lily seemed satisfied with this answer, closing her eyes with a small smile. As Avery and Ethan left Lily's room, they paused at the door, looking back at their sleeping child. The corner where so much had happened 5 years ago was just a corner, the rocking chair just a chair. But the room itself held memory, held the echo of something extraordinary. They had been changed by what happened here, opened to possibilities they couldn't have imagined before. "Do you ever wonder," Ethan asked quietly, "if we'll experience something like that again? If we were given just one glimpse, or if there's more we haven't seen yet?" Avery leaned into him, considering the question. "I think," she said slowly, "that once you've seen the veil lift, you notice it's thinner than you thought in lots of places. We just have to keep our eyes open, keep believing that there's more to this world than what we can measure and prove." They stood there for a moment longer, two rational adults who had been forced to expand their definition of rational. The house settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs, the sound of home, of safety, of love contained and protected within walls. But they knew now that love wasn't contained by walls any more than it was contained by death. It flowed freely between worlds, connecting souls across distances that seemed impossible to bridge. As they prepared for bed themselves, Avery found herself thinking about all the families in the hospital, all the moments of crisis where medicine reached its limits. How many times had she witnessed something she couldn't explain and dismissed it as coincidence or exhaustion? How many families had felt the presence of loved ones in those liminal spaces between life and death, only to be told it was just their imagination? She made a quiet resolution to be more open, more accepting of the mysteries families brought to her. Not to abandon science or medical protocol, but to acknowledge that healing happened on levels beyond the physical. She would listen when parents said they felt their children fighting to stay or letting go. She would respect the invisible connections that sustained families through crisis. The next morning brought normalcy, breakfast chaos, work schedules, the mundane beauty of regular life. But underneath the routine ran a current of awareness, a recognition that the ordinary world was shot through with the extraordinary. Every interaction held the potential for mystery. Every moment of love was a small miracle defying the laws of entropy and isolation. Lily went to school carrying her dinosaur in her backpack, a tangible reminder of a night she couldn't fully remember, but somehow knew had shaped her. Jacob continued his recovery, growing stronger and more confident, carrying his mother's love forward in his passion for learning. Sarah found purpose in her grief, becoming an advocate for children who had lost parents, creating support groups that honored both loss and resilience. And in the hospital, Avery worked with new eyes, seeing not just bodies to be healed, but souls connected in vast, invisible networks of love. She never again experienced anything quite like that night with Jacob's surgery, but she found smaller mysteries everywhere. The patient who woke up knowing things they shouldn't know, the family member who dreamed of their loved one's crisis from miles away, the children who saw things adults couldn't. The revelation came not as a thunderclap, but as a gentle dawn, spreading its understanding slowly across the landscape of their comprehension. Avery had returned home from the hospital after successfully completing Jacob's surgery, her body beyond exhaustion but her mind strangely alert, processing the impossible events of the past 48 hours. She sat with Ethan in their living room, Lily sleeping peacefully upstairs, and they began to piece together the timeline of what had occurred. The more they talked, the more the seemingly disconnected events began to form a pattern, like stars aligning to create a constellation that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. "Tell me again about when it started," Avery said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep but steady with the need to understand. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his way of organizing his thoughts. "It was almost exactly when you started Jacob's surgery," he said slowly. "I checked the time because Lily had been fussing all morning, and then suddenly she just stopped. It was 2:15 p.m. She turned toward that corner and became completely calm, completely focused." Avery felt her breath catch. "That's when I made the first incision. That's when I felt the presence beside me, when my hands stopped shaking." They looked at each other, both scientists in their own ways, both trained to seek logical explanations, now confronting something that defied every principle they had built their understanding of the world upon. The synchronicity was too perfect to be coincidence, too specific to be dismissed as exhaustion-induced hallucination. "The nurse mentioned something," Avery continued, her mind racing back through the surgical details. "She said Jacob's vitals stabilized at exactly that moment too. His heart rate, which had been erratic, suddenly found a steady rhythm. The anesthesiologist commented on it, said he'd never seen anything like it. A child with that level of trauma shouldn't have been that stable." She paused, looking at her hands, the hands that had performed impossible surgery with impossible precision. What if it wasn't just me being guided? What if whatever Lily was seeing was somehow protecting Jacob too? Ethan stood and began pacing, his engineering mind trying to construct a framework for understanding. "Let's think about this systematically," he said. "We have 3 locations. Here with Lily, the OR with you and Jacob, and—" He stopped, the unspoken location hanging in the air between them. "And wherever Jessica Brooks was," Avery finished quietly, "the mother who didn't survive." They sat with that thought for a moment, the weight of it settling around them like a blanket. Outside, the world was waking up, normal life continuing with its usual rhythms, unaware that in this small house, 2 people were grappling with evidence of something extraordinary. A car drove by, its radio playing faintly through the open window. Somewhere, a dog barked. These mundane sounds seemed almost surreal against the magnitude of what they were considering. "I need to know more about her," Avery said suddenly. "About Jessica. If we're really considering that her presence was somehow with Jacob during surgery, with Lily here at home, then I need to understand who she was." It felt important, crucial even, to give shape and substance to this presence that had touched their lives so profoundly. Not just as a medical casualty, a name on a chart, but as a person, a mother, a force of love that might have transcended the ultimate boundary. The next day, despite her exhaustion, Avery returned to the hospital. She found the nurse who had been in OR 3 when Jessica was brought in, a veteran trauma nurse named Savannah Reed, who had worked at the hospital for 15 years. Savannah was just finishing her shift, and something in Avery's expression must have conveyed the importance of the conversation, because she agreed to talk despite her own fatigue. "I've seen a lot of trauma cases," Savannah began, settling into a chair in the break room with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. But there was something different about her. Jessica Brooks. Even though she was critically injured, barely conscious, she kept saying her son's name. Jacob, over and over. The surgical team did everything they could, but the damage was too extensive. Savannah paused, looking at Avery with eyes that had seen too much death, too much loss. "She died at 3:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because right before she went, she suddenly opened her eyes wide, like she was seeing something beyond the OR. She smiled. 'Dr. Johnson.' Despite everything, she smiled, and she said, clear as day, 'Take care of him.' Then she was gone." Avery felt the blood drain from her face. 3:47 p.m., she repeated. That's when I felt the presence strongest. That's when the most critical part of Jacob's surgery happened, when I had to repair the damage to his liver. It should have taken me an hour to do what I did in 15 minutes. My hands moved like they knew exactly what to do, like someone was guiding them who had done this exact procedure 1,000 times before." Savannah leaned forward, her expression intense. "There's more?" "After she died, several of us felt, I don't know how to describe it, like the room wasn't empty, even though her body was still, like something was lingering, waiting. One of the younger nurses said she felt like someone was standing beside her, someone grateful and sad and determined all at once. We all felt it leave about an hour later, just suddenly gone, like whatever was waiting had found what it was looking for." The timeline was becoming clearer, more impossible, more undeniable. Jessica had died, and in those moments after death, something of her had remained. Not stuck or trapped, but purposeful, seeking. And somehow, she had found her way to her son's surgery, to Avery's hands that would save him, and perhaps most mysteriously to a baby who could still see what adults had learned to ignore. When Avery returned home that evening, she found Ethan in Lily's nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with their daughter in his arms. Lily was awake but quiet, playing with her favorite stuffed rabbit, occasionally looking at the corner that had held her attention for so long the day before. "She keeps looking over there," Ethan said softly. "Not constantly like yesterday, but every now and then, like she's checking to see if someone's still there." Avery took Lily from him, feeling the solid weight of her daughter, the warmth of her small body. "Hi, sweet girl," she murmured. "What do you see that we can't?" Lily looked at her mother with those wise baby eyes, then turned to the corner and waved. A small gesture that made both parents catch their breath. It wasn't the focused attention of the previous day, but an acknowledgement, a greeting to something or someone who might still be lingering at the edges of perception. That night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Avery found herself researching. Not medical journals or surgical techniques, but accounts of near-death experiences, of deathbed visions, of the many ways people throughout history had described encounters with deceased loved ones. The rational part of her mind kept insisting she was being foolish, that exhaustion and emotion were causing her to see patterns where none existed. But the evidence of her own experience, of Ethan's observations, of the impossible timeline that connected Jessica's death to Jacob's survival, demanded consideration. She found herself reading about something called terminal lucidity, the phenomenon where dying patients suddenly become alert and coherent in their final moments. She read about crisis apparitions, where people appear to loved ones at the moment of death, even across great distances. She read about children who reported seeing deceased grandparents they had never met, describing them accurately down to clothing and mannerisms. Each account she read made the impossible seem slightly less impossible, made their experience part of a larger pattern of human experience that science had yet to explain. Ethan found her there at 3 a.m., surrounded by printouts and laptop screens. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, settling beside her on the couch. She showed him what she had been reading, and together they dove into this rabbit hole of mystery and possibility. They found quantum physics theories about consciousness surviving bodily death, psychological studies about the prevalence of after-death communications, philosophical arguments about the nature of love as a force that transcends physical boundaries. "Look at this," Ethan said, pointing to an article about something called quantum entanglement. "It says that particles that have interacted remain connected even when separated by vast distances. What happens to one affects the other instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. What if consciousness works the same way? What if the bonds between people, especially between parents and children, create a kind of entanglement that persists beyond physical separation?" It was a beautiful thought, even if it was scientifically speculative. The idea that love created connections at the quantum level, that the bond between Jessica and Jacob was so fundamental that even death couldn't sever it completely. Avery thought about her own connection to Lily, the way she could sense her daughter's needs even from another room, the physical pain she felt when Lily was hurt or scared. If that connection existed in life, why couldn't it persist in some form after death? The next morning brought a call from the hospital. Jacob was showing signs of waking up. His brain activity had increased overnight, and the medical team thought he might regain consciousness soon. Avery felt compelled to be there, to witness the completion of what had started in the OR. She brought Ethan and Lily with her, sensing that their presence was somehow important to whatever was unfolding. They arrived to find Sarah Brooks, Jessica's mother, already at Jacob's bedside. Her eyes were red with crying, but there was hope in her expression that hadn't been there before. "The doctors say he's going to wake up soon," she said, gripping Avery's hands. "They say the surgery was perfect, that there's no sign of brain damage despite everything. They're calling it miraculous. Avery wanted to tell her about what they had experienced, about the presence that had guided the surgery, about Lily's mysterious vigil. But how did you tell a grieving mother that her daughter might have found a way to save her son from beyond death? How did you speak such things without sounding insane or cruel? So she simply squeezed Sarah's hands and said, "Jacob is a fighter. And he was loved." Sometimes that makes all the difference. As they stood around Jacob's bed, Lily began to squirm in Ethan's arms, reaching toward the boy with increasing insistence. Sarah noticed and smiled through her tears. "She wants to say hello," she said. "May I?" She held out her arms, and Ethan carefully transferred Lily to her. Sarah brought the baby close to the bed, and Lily immediately reached out, placing her tiny hand on Jacob's arm. What happened next would be debated and discussed in the Marshall household for years to come. The moment Lily touched Jacob, his eyes fluttered open. Not the slow, confused awakening typical of coma patients, but a sudden, alert opening, as if he had simply been waiting for the right moment. His gaze found Lily first, and he smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "The baby," he whispered, his voice raspy from the ventilator that had been removed just hours before. "The baby from my dream." Sarah gasped, nearly dropping Lily in her shock. Avery quickly took the baby while Sarah leaned over her grandson. "Jacob." "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Jacob's eyes shifted to his grandmother and confusion crossed his features. "Grandma?" "Where's Mommy? She was just here. She said she had to go, but that you would take care of me. She said the baby would help me remember." The adults exchanged glances over the children's heads, each processing this in their own way. Sarah's tears flowed freely as she stroked Jacob's hair. "Mommy had to go away, sweetheart. But she loves you so much. She loves you more than all the stars in the sky, remember? That's what she always said." Jacob nodded slowly, his 7-year-old mind trying to process something no child should have to understand. "She was made of light," he said quietly. "In my dream, she was made of light. She held my hand during the scary parts, and there was a lady there too, a nice lady who was fixing me. Mommy stood beside her, helping." His eyes found Avery. "Was that you? Were you the fixing lady?" Avery could only nod, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. Jacob had seen it, had experienced from his unconscious state what she had felt in the OR. Jessica had been there somehow, guiding Avery's hands, comforting her son, bridging the gap between life and death with a mother's determination to see her child safe. "And the baby could see her," Jacob continued, looking at Lily with wonder. "The baby could see Mommy when she was made of light. That's why Mommy smiled. She said, 'Babies remember things grown-ups forget.'" He reached out weakly, and Lily grabbed his finger in her small fist, holding tight as if confirming his words. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors and Sarah's quiet crying. Here was confirmation from the most unlikely source. A child who had been unconscious, who had no way of knowing what Lily had seen or what Avery had experienced. Yet his account aligned perfectly with their own impossible experiences, creating a truth that transcended individual perception. Dr. Michael Hayes entered the room, stopping short when he saw Jacob awake and alert. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, quickly moving to examine the boy. "Jacob, you gave us quite a scare. How are you feeling?" As he conducted his neurological assessment, he kept shooting glances at Avery, clearly puzzled by the rapid recovery. Everything about Jacob's condition suggested he should have taken days, maybe weeks, to reach this level of consciousness and coherence. "There's something special about this one," Michael said quietly to Avery as he finished his examination. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it. The surgery, the recovery, all of it. It's like he had a guardian angel. He meant it as a figure of speech, but Avery heard the truth in it. Jacob had indeed had a guardian, one made of love and light and fierce maternal determination. As the days passed and Jacob continued his remarkable recovery, the story began to take shape in the family's understanding. Not a ghost story, not a medical miracle, but something in between, something that spoke to the connections that bind souls together. Jessica's love for her son had been stronger than death, finding a way to ensure his survival even as her own life ended. She had found allies in unexpected places, a surgeon whose exhaustion had made her receptive to guidance, a baby whose innocent perception could still see between worlds, a family who would become witnesses to love's ultimate expression. Sarah began visiting the Marshalls regularly, bringing Jacob when he was strong enough. The children developed a bond that went beyond their shared experience, a friendship built on something profound and unspoken. Lily, even as she grew older and more verbal, never spoke directly about what she had seen that night. But sometimes, when Jacob was sad or scared, she would put her hand on his arm in exactly the same spot she had touched in the hospital, and he would calm, as if receiving comfort from someone only he could feel. One evening, about a month after Jacob's release from the hospital, Sarah brought something to show them. It was Jessica's journal, discovered while cleaning out her apartment. "I thought you should see this," Sarah said, her hands trembling as she opened it to a marked page. She wrote this a week before the accident. The entry was dated just 7 days before the crash, written in Jessica's neat handwriting. "Had the strangest dream last night," it read. "I was standing in a hospital room, but I wasn't solid. I was made of light, like sunlight through water. Jacob was there, hurt but healing, and there was a woman with kind hands fixing him. A baby was watching me, really seeing me, and I knew everything would be okay. I woke up feeling peaceful, but also sad, like I had said goodbye to something precious. I hugged Jacob extra tight this morning. Something feels different, like change is coming. Whatever happens, I need him to know he is loved beyond measure, beyond time, beyond everything." The journal entry hit them like a physical force. Jessica had dreamed of her own death, of the scene that would play out a week later. Or perhaps it wasn't a dream, but a glimpse into a moment outside of time, where past and future collapsed into a single point of love and necessity. They sat in stunned silence, each grappling with the implications of this revelation. "She knew," Sarah whispered. Somehow, she knew. And she prepared herself to do what she needed to do. It was a thought both comforting and heartbreaking. The idea that Jessica had been given warning, had used that time to pour extra love into her son, to prepare herself for the ultimate sacrifice and gift a mother could give. Avery found herself thinking about predestination versus free will, about whether Jessica could have changed the outcome if she had understood her dream differently. But looking at Jacob, alive and healing, playing with Lily on the living room floor, she realized it didn't matter. Whatever forces had aligned to create this outcome, they had resulted in a child's survival and a testament to love that transcended understanding. The journal became a treasured artifact, proof that their experience hadn't been collective delusion or grief-induced fantasy. Jessica had seen it too, had been part of it before it even happened. Time itself seemed to have bent around the force of a mother's love, creating loops and connections that defied linear understanding. As autumn turned to winter, life settled into new patterns. Jacob started physical therapy, relearning to walk without a limp, building back the strength the accident had stolen. He carried his dinosaur everywhere, but now it was joined by a small photo of his mother that Sarah had laminated for him. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, they would see him talking to the photo, telling his mother about his day, about his progress, about the dreams where she still visited him. Avery returned to her surgical practice, but she was changed. She found herself more attuned to the invisible currents in the OR, the moments when something more than medical skill was needed. She became known among the nursing staff as the doctor who would pray with families if asked, who didn't dismiss their feelings and intuitions about their loved ones. She never told anyone except Ethan about what had happened during Jacob's surgery, but she carried it with her, a constant reminder that healing happened on levels beyond the physical. One particularly difficult day, when Avery lost a patient despite her best efforts, she found herself in the hospital chapel, a place she had never visited before. She sat in the quiet space, thinking about the unfairness of it all, how one child could be saved by mysterious forces while another slipped away despite everything medical science could offer. There were no easy answers, no clear patterns to divine intervention or spiritual presence. Love didn't always transcend death in ways humans could perceive or understand. But as she sat there, she felt a familiar presence, subtle but unmistakable. Not Jessica this time, but something larger, more encompassing, a sense that every loss was also a transformation, every ending a beginning in some realm beyond human comprehension. She thought of the mother she had just lost, wondered if somewhere, in some dimension beyond the physical, that mother was finding her own way to continue loving, protecting, guiding her child. The chapel door opened, and Sarah Brooks entered, looking surprised to find Avery there. "I come here sometimes," Sarah explained, settling into the pew beside her. "To talk to Jessica. To thank her for those extra moments she somehow gave us." They sat together in comfortable silence, two women who had witnessed the impossible, who knew that death was not the absolute ending it appeared to be. "Do you think it will happen again?" Sarah asked eventually. "Do? You think other families experience this but just don't talk about it?" Avery considered the question. In her research, she had found thousands of accounts of after-death communications, deathbed visions, mysterious interventions. Most people kept these experiences private, afraid of being judged or disbelieved. Their own story would likely remain within their small circle, too profound and personal to share widely. "I think," Avery said carefully, "that love creates possibilities we don't fully understand. I think the connections between souls, especially between parents and children, operate by rules we haven't discovered yet. And I think Jessica showed us that sometimes, in the moments when it matters most, those connections can bridge any gap, even the one between life and death." Christmas arrived with a mix of joy and poignancy. The Marshalls invited Sarah and Jacob to celebrate with them, creating a new kind of family bonded by extraordinary circumstances. Jacob had made decorations at school, including an angel that he insisted on placing at the top of their tree. "It looks like Mommy did in my dream," he explained matter-of-factly. "All light and love." Lily, now talking in full sentences, had her own contribution. She had drawn a picture in preschool of her family, but it included extra figures. When asked about them, she simply said, "The light people. They're always there, but mostly invisible." Her teacher had found it concerning, but Avery and Ethan understood. Their daughter retained some vestige of that infant perception, the ability to sense the presence that adults had trained themselves to ignore. As they sat around the dinner table, sharing stories and laughter, Avery found herself overwhelmed with gratitude, not just for their health and happiness, but for the expansion of their understanding, for the proof they had been given that reality was far more mysterious and beautiful than they had imagined. The rational world of medicine and engineering still existed, still mattered, but it was now part of a larger tapestry that included threads of mystery, wonder, and transcendent love. Jacob raised his glass of apple juice for a toast, a gesture that seemed too mature for his 8 years. "To Mom," he said simply, "thank you for saving me." They all raised their glasses, even little Lily with her sippy cup, honoring a presence that had touched all their lives. And for just a moment, the candles on the table flickered without any breeze, and the room seemed to fill with warmth that had nothing to do with the heating system. After dinner, as the children played with new toys and the adults cleaned up, Sarah shared something she had been thinking about. "I want to start a foundation," she said, "in Jessica's name, for children who've lost parents, especially in accidents. Not just financial support, but emotional support. Helping them understand that love doesn't end with death. That their parents are still with them in ways we might not fully understand." It was a beautiful idea, a way to transform grief into purpose, to help other families navigate the impossible terrain of loss and mysterious connection. Avery immediately volunteered to be involved, to share what she could from a medical perspective about the experiences families reported in hospitals, the moments of transcendence that occurred around death and healing. As the evening wound down and Jacob grew tired, he curled up on the couch next to Lily. Within minutes, both children were asleep, Lily's hand resting on Jacob's arm, in what had become her habitual gesture of comfort. Looking at them, Avery was struck by how much healing had occurred, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. These children had been part of something extraordinary, had been witnesses to and participants in a love that defied the boundaries humans usually accepted. Sarah prepared to carry Jacob to the car, but before she did, she turned to Avery and Ethan. "I need you to know," she said, tears in her eyes, "that you saved more than Jacob's life. You saved my faith in meaning, in purpose, in the idea that we're all connected in ways we can't see. Jessica chose well when she guided you to save her son. Somehow, I think she knew you would understand, that you would be open to the mystery of it all." After they left, Avery and Ethan stood in their doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the night. The stars were brilliant overhead, each one a sun, each potentially warming worlds they couldn't imagine. The universe was vast and mysterious, full of forces and connections that humanity had barely begun to understand. But in their small corner of it, they had been given proof that love was one of those forces, perhaps the strongest one, capable of transcending every boundary humans thought absolute. "Do you think Lily will remember any of this when she's older?" Ethan asked as they prepared for bed. Avery considered the question. Memory was a strange thing, especially early childhood memory. The specific events might fade, but she suspected the knowing would remain, the deep understanding that reality was more fluid and connected than most people believed. "I think she'll remember the feeling of it," Avery said. "The sense that love is bigger than we think, that the people we love are never really gone. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the gift Jessica gave her, gave all of us. The knowledge that death isn't the end of love, just a transformation of it." That night, Avery dreamed of the OR, but it wasn't a trauma dream or a replay of exhaustion. In the dream, she was performing surgery, but the room was filled with light, and she could see all the connections between herself and the patient, between the patient and their loved ones, between all the people who had ever been in that room fighting for life. It was like seeing the quantum entanglement Ethan had read about, but made visible, a web of light connecting every soul to every other soul. She woke with tears on her face, not from sadness but from the sheer beauty of what she had seen. Beside her, Ethan stirred, instinctively pulling her closer. "Bad dream?" he asked sleepily. "No," she whispered. "A gift, another gift." And as she settled back into sleep, she could have sworn she felt a presence in the room, gentle and grateful, checking on them one last time before moving on to wherever souls went when their earthly work was complete. The months that followed brought a gradual return to normalcy, though normal had been redefined for everyone involved. Jacob continued his recovery, surpassing every medical expectation. His cognitive function showed no signs of impairment from the accident. If anything, he seemed to possess an unusual depth of understanding for a child his age. His teachers reported that he had a calming effect on other children, especially those dealing with loss or trauma. It was as if his experience had given him a special ability to comfort others, to help them understand that love persisted beyond physical presence. Lily grew into a remarkably empathetic toddler, often knowing when someone was sad or hurt before they showed any outward signs. She would toddle over to them with one of her toys, or simply pat their arm in that specific way she had learned that night in the hospital. Avery and Ethan watched her development with fascination, wondering what other gifts her early experience might have given her, what sensitivities she might retain that others had lost. The foundation Sarah established in Jessica's name began to take shape, with Avery serving on the board and providing medical insight into grief and healing. They organized support groups for children who had lost parents, creating safe spaces where kids could share their experiences of sensing their deceased parents' presence without fear of being dismissed or pathologized. The stories that emerged were remarkably similar to Jacob's: dreams of parents made of light, feelings of being watched over during difficult moments, signs and synchronicities that defied rational explanation. One particularly moving session involved a young girl named Haley Dawson, who had lost her father in a construction accident. She had been afraid to sleep, terrified of the dark, until one night she saw what she described as Daddy's light standing by her bed. "He didn't have a body," she explained to the group, "but I knew it was him. He touched my head, and I wasn't scared anymore. Now I see his light sometimes when I really need him, like during thunderstorms or when Mom cries." Jacob, who had become something of a mentor to the younger children in the group, nodded knowingly. "The light is real," he told Haley with the authority of someone who had lived this truth. "Our parents found a way to stay with us, just different than before. We're lucky because we can still feel them. Some grown-ups forget how to feel them, but we remember. These sessions were revelatory for many parents as well, giving them permission to acknowledge their own experiences of sensing their deceased partners or parents. The foundation became known not for promoting any particular religious or spiritual belief, but for honoring the mystery of continued connection, for validating experiences that mainstream psychology often dismissed as wish fulfillment or complicated grief. Avery found her medical practice evolving as well. She became known as the surgeon who would sit with families in their darkest moments, who would acknowledge the mysterious experiences they reported without judgment. She developed a reputation for being present during what some called miraculous recoveries, though she knew that miracles were simply events that current science couldn't explain. Her success rate with difficult pediatric surgeries continued to be exceptional, and while she never again experienced guidance as dramatic as during Jacob's surgery, she remained open to the subtle intuitions that sometimes guided her hands. One spring evening, about a year after the accident, the two families gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the lake. Jacob was thriving in school, his dinosaur obsession evolving into a genuine interest in paleontology and biology. He carried himself with a quiet confidence unusual in a 9-year-old, the bearing of someone who had faced the worst and survived. Lily, now 3, chattered constantly about her preschool adventures. Her vocabulary advanced for her age, peppered with observations that sometimes stopped adults in their tracks with their insight. During dinner, Jacob pulled out a school project he had been working on, a report about family heroes. "I wrote about 3 people," he announced. "Mom, because she saved me even after she died. Dr. Avery, because she fixed me when everyone said it was impossible. And Lily, because she could see what nobody else could see and helped everyone understand." The adults were speechless. In his simple, child's language, Jacob had articulated the heart of their shared experience. Heroes weren't just the living. They included those whose love transcended death. Heroes were those who remained open to impossible guidance, who trusted the wisdom of innocence, who bore witness to mysteries that redefined reality. "Can I read the last part?" Jacob asked, pulling out his paper. "My teacher said it was really good." He cleared his throat and read, "Some people think death means the end, but I learned that love is stronger than death. My mom couldn't stay with her body, but she stayed with her love. That love saved me, and now I carry it forward. Every time I help someone who is sad, every time I'm brave when I'm scared, I'm using my mom's love. It's like energy. It doesn't disappear, it just changes form. And sometimes, if we're really quiet and really pay attention, we can still feel it, warming us like sunshine through a window." There wasn't a dry eye at the table. Even Lily, sensing the emotion, reached over to pat Jacob's arm in her signature gesture of comfort. "Good job, Jacob," she said solemnly. "Your mommy is proud." And for a moment, just a fleeting instant, they all felt it. A presence, a warmth, a sense of being held in something larger than themselves. Sarah raised her water glass in a toast. "To Jessica," she said, "who showed us that love knows no boundaries. To Avery, who had the courage to trust in the impossible. To Ethan, who held space for mystery in a rational world. To Lily, who reminded us that children see truth adults have forgotten. And to Jacob, who carries forward a legacy of love that will ripple out in ways we can't imagine." They clinked glasses, even Lily with her plastic cup, sealing a bond that had been forged in crisis but had evolved into something beautiful. They were a chosen family, connected not by blood, but by their shared witness to the extraordinary. They had seen behind the veil that separates the living from the dead, had learned that the separation was more permeable than most people believed. As dinner concluded and they prepared to part ways, Jacob had one more surprise. He pulled out a small box and handed it to Lily. "I made this for you," he said shyly. Inside was a bracelet made of colorful beads, with a small dinosaur charm hanging from it. "So you remember that you helped save me. And so you remember that seeing special things is a gift, even when you get older and people tell you it's not real." Lily put on the bracelet immediately, admiring how it looked on her small wrist. "I'll remember," she promised with the solemnity of a 3-year-old making a sacred vow. "I'll always remember the light people, and how love doesn't stop." She hugged Jacob tightly, and in that embrace, Avery saw the future. These 2 children growing up with an understanding of reality that included both the seen and unseen, the rational and the mysterious, the finite and the infinite. Walking to their cars, Ethan reflected on how much had changed since that night when he had paced the house, worried about his exhausted wife, watching his baby daughter stare at an empty corner. "We could have missed all this," he said to Avery. "If we had dismissed what Lily was seeing, if you had ignored what you felt in the OR, if we had chosen the rational explanation over the mysterious truth. But we didn't," Avery replied, taking his hand. "Something in us stayed open, stayed curious. Maybe that's part of the gift, too, that we were the right people at the right time to receive this message, to be witnesses to this truth." She looked back at Jacob and Sarah getting into their car, at Lily waving goodbye with her bracelet catching the light. Jessica didn't just save her son. She gave all of us proof that love transcends everything we thought we knew about reality. That night, as they tucked Lily into bed, she asked a question that showed her growing understanding of their experience. "Mommy, will I always be able to see the light people?" Aubrey sat on the edge of her bed, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. As we get older, sometimes we forget how to see certain things. But I think if you remember that they're there, if you stay open to the mystery, you'll always be able to feel them, even if you can't see them the same way." Lily considered this, playing with her dinosaur bracelet. "I think Jacob's mommy wanted us to know that love is the strongest thing," she said finally. "Stronger than being scared, stronger than being gone. She wanted us to tell other people so they won't be so sad when someone they love goes away." Out of the mouths of babes, Avery thought again. Her 3-year-old had articulated the purpose behind their entire experience. "That's exactly right," Ethan said, kissing Lily's forehead. "And that's why we'll keep telling the story in our own ways to people who need to hear it." They left Lily's room, but not before she waved at the corner where it had all begun, a gentle goodbye to whatever remnant of mystery might still linger there. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Jacob grew into a compassionate teenager, eventually deciding to pursue medicine himself, inspired by Avery's example. He never lost his connection to his mother's presence, though it evolved from vivid dreams to a more subtle sense of guidance during important moments. His dinosaur collection remained displayed in his room, each piece a reminder of his mother's love and the mysterious way it had saved him. Lily retained more of her sensitivity than most children, becoming known among her friends as someone who always knew when something was wrong, who could comfort people in uncanny ways. She never spoke publicly about seeing light people, but she carried the knowledge with her, a secret understanding that reality was far more complex and beautiful than most people realized. The dinosaur bracelet Jacob had made for her was eventually replaced with others as she grew, but she kept the original in a special box, a tangible reminder of the night that had changed everything. Avery and Ethan's marriage was strengthened by their shared experience, bonded by their mutual witness to the impossible. They had seen proof that love could transcend death, that consciousness might persist beyond the body, that the connections between souls operated by laws science had yet to discover. This knowledge informed their parenting, their work, their understanding of what it meant to be human in a universe full of mystery. Sarah became a grandmother figure to Lily, and the two families continued to gather regularly, their bond unbreakable. The foundation grew, helping hundreds of families process loss while remaining open to continued connection. It became a place where the bereaved could share their experiences of sensing their loved ones without fear of judgment, where children like Jacob and Haley could understand that their perceptions were gifts, not symptoms. On the 5th anniversary of the accident, they all returned to the hospital together. Not to the ICU or the OR, but to the chapel where Avery and Sarah had first sat together in shared understanding. They lit candles, for Jessica, for all the parents who had found ways to protect their children from beyond, for all the children who had been touched by love that transcended death. Jacob, now 13 and taller than his grandmother, spoke with a voice that was changing, but a conviction that was steady. "My mom died 5 years ago today," he said. "But she also saved me 5 years ago today. She showed us that death isn't the end of love, just a change in how we experience it. Every good thing I do, every person I help, every moment I choose love over fear, she's there in that choice. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living force that continues to work through me and everyone she touched." Lily, 8 years old and wise beyond her years, added her own thoughts. I don't remember everything about that night, but I remember the feeling, like the whole universe was holding its breath, watching love do something impossible. I think that's what miracles really are. Love refusing to follow the rules we think it has to follow. As they sat in the chapel, each processing their own understanding of what had transpired, a shaft of afternoon sunlight broke through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the floor. It was just refracted light, easily explained by physics. But to those gathered there, it was also a reminder that light itself was a mystery, simultaneously wave and particle, behaving differently when observed, full of properties science was still discovering. "Look," Lily said, pointing to where the colors danced on the floor. "Light people." And for a moment they could all see it, not figures or faces, but the suggestion of presence in the play of light, the hint of consciousness in the seemingly random patterns. It was probably just their imagination, their pattern-seeking brains creating meaning where none existed. Or perhaps it was Jessica and all the other souls who had found ways to reach across the divide, checking in one more time, reminding them that love was indeed the strongest force in the universe. As they left the chapel, returning to their daily lives, they carried with them the knowledge that had been Jessica's final gift. Death was not the opposite of life but a part of it, a transformation rather than an ending. Love persisted. Consciousness continued in forms yet to be understood, and sometimes, in moments of great need or profound connection, the veil between worlds grew thin enough for miracles to slip through. The story of the mother bear who worked 48 hours straight was true, but it was only part of the truth. The complete story included another mother, one whose love transcended her own death to ensure her child's survival. It included a baby who could see what others couldn't, a surgeon who accepted impossible guidance, a father who held space for mystery, and a grandmother who turned grief into purpose. It was a story that proved love was stronger than death. The connections between souls operated beyond the laws of physics as currently understood, and that sometimes the universe conspired to show humanity that reality was far more magical than anyone dared to believe. The ripples from that night continued to spread, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. Every child helped by Sarah's foundation. Every family comforted by the knowledge that death wasn't absolute separation. Every moment of mysterious connection validated rather than dismissed. All of these were part of Jessica's legacy, part of the love that had refused to be contained by death. And in quiet moments, when the world grew still, and the boundary between possible and impossible grew thin, those who had been part of that miraculous night could still feel it. The presence of love that transcended form, the connections that bound all souls together. The truth that death was not the end, but simply another beginning in the endless dance of consciousness through the cosmos. They had been given a glimpse behind the veil, had seen that love was indeed the fundamental force that held everything together, from the smallest quantum particle to the vastest galaxy, from the briefest life to the eternal soul. This was the real story of the mother bear who worked 48 hours straight. The complete truth of what the baby witnessed that put everyone in tears. It was a testament to love's power to transcend every boundary, to the mystery that surrounded and sustained all life, and to the beautiful, impossible, absolutely true fact that those we love never really leave us. They simply transform into something larger, lighter, and more present than we ever imagined possible.